Hey y'all, man, has it been a busy week at work, and I've got to work all weekend. But it's Friday night, and I'm gonna do some stories. I got a big pile of them here. Let's start whittling through these because they're all really good. The first one is awesome. I don't know. It made me think of when I was a kid. You know how when you're a kid, things are kind of hazy. I've said that to my mother before, and she says, I think everything is still kind of hazy to you. Well, she might be right. I'm not sure. But let's get into this first one, and then we'll start hammering them out till I get tired tonight, and then I'll edit the video and get it up as quick as I can. All right, here we go.
Real bad boy. I've got a ton of gravel in my shoes, girl on my shoulder, heart full of blues, I'm in the dirt.
First story we have is sent to me by a woman. She's talking about a Bigfoot encounter she had when she was a little girl, and I think it's awesome. She writes, I have always been fascinated and terrified by Bigfoot growing up, but in my story I'm about to tell, I suppose it is only natural. I'm going to be 25 this year, and my father has always loved to hear about Bigfoot, and that prompted the location of my encounter. Let me explain first that my encounter happened when I was 4, and I just recently rediscovered the place where it happened while plotting a camping trip for my parents a few months back, and it struck me that I was not dreaming, and my vivid memory was not the imagination of a 4-year-old. It was fall in the year of 1998, and my parents had just snagged an Airstream trailer to take on the road in an attempt to enjoy life while they were still young. I was just a toddler then, so I don't remember much of the trip other than there being trees and playing close to the campsite wherever we went, but this night was one that I have never forgotten. My encounter was short, but it had quite the impact. We had been traveling through the forest and river areas of Northern California when we entered the Trinity National Forest area. It had been your average camping trip with barbecues, campfires, walks through the woods. However, a storm was rolling in on this night. Night was coming on, and we seemed to have nowhere to go because for some reason, either it was off-season, a holiday, or maybe something to do with the storm, all the trailer and RV parks and campgrounds were closed, except one place, ironically, a Bigfoot-themed campground. They had pity and let us in so we wouldn't be stuck dry camping in the storm. The way I remember, it was a windstorm with clouds rolling quickly across the sky and thick bunches of fluffy gray, and as the sun set and the night fell, I watched what looked like a full moon fade in and out of the dark, shadowy clouds. The trailer shook from time to time in the wind, and of course I had a bedtime. We had all gone to sleep, or at least my parents did. I was wide awake and quite grumpy that the wind was keeping me up. It was cold, and I was content to close my eyes and stay warm under the covers. It seemed like it was about 3 a.m., and I felt like someone was standing next to me. At first, I wanted to hide under my covers to block out the monsters in my imagination that often haunted me in the dark, but for some reason I peeked out of the covers and stared at the curtain for a few minutes. I saw a shadow, a rounded shadow for a tree, and the leaves looked funny, wiry, and thin, but it wasn't a tree, and that confused me so much that I swallowed my fear to see what the strange shape was. I sat up on my knees and timidly lifted the bottom of the blinds. It was staring right at me in the eyes. I froze for some reason, even though I remember my dad trying to scare me with Bigfoot stories, and we were staying at a camp named after Bigfoot. It never touched the trailer, but it had a soft face with possible freckle spots, dark eyes, and the clouds had parted enough to give it a silver outline through its wiry hair. We had both frozen, and the first movement it made, to my amusement, was its mouth parted slightly and its brows rose in what I believe was surprise, perhaps shock that a pipsqueak like me found it out. I finally came to and I slammed the blind down, crying, and ran to wake up my parents to tell them Bigfoot was outside. I received the generic, "Oh honey, calm down, it was just a nightmare." My mother tucked me back into bed, and I didn't sleep for a long time, listening through the wind for any validation that it had happened. I shrugged it off and decided it was just a statue that the campground kept, since I had thought I had seen one on the way in. In the morning, however, I was walking around trying to figure out where the statue had gone. There wasn't a statue, and I do not remember seeing any prints. My father didn't see any either, or at least he never noticed any that I know of. And he is the kind of guy that would be over the moon if he found a footprint on the ground. To this day, I remember it vividly, and I am eager to go back again to see the view I had from that window. I look at that trailer often and think about how tall the creature must have been for his face to reach the window so easily, and how it could go about unnoticed when it had to have been nearly the size of a truck we used to pull the trailer with. I remember it clearly, as many do when they have adrenaline and the sharpened senses that come with great fear. The tingling feeling that something was there. The sense of dread that a story may actually be true and play out in real life. I believe it was an old Bigfoot. It seemed weathered with peppered hair that was thinning out, and I didn't see its teeth when it seemed to gasp or part its lips to make its expression of what I guessed was surprise. It could have been wondering what its reflection was in the mirrored finish of the Airstream when my tiny little girl face appeared instead of their own. I just think that is so funny. Okay, I'm sorry. That is my story, short as it was. I will say this particular Bigfoot seems soft and very human to me when I replay the memory to myself as I listen to the stories on your channel. Thank you. I want to say your name, but I can't. So you know who you are. Thank you. I wasn't laughing at the story. I just picture these things in my mind, and I can see this Bigfoot going, oh, I mean, seeing your face and thinking it's its reflection. That just kind of tickled me a little bit. So I hope that didn't take away from the story. All right, let's go to the next one. All right, this next one is kind of short. It was sent to me by Michael. It's short, but it's really good. In 1996, I was living in Colfax, Iowa. It was in the springtime, and I was out looking for mushrooms in the wilderness. I came upon a spot in a ravine that seemed different. It almost had a different vibe about it. It was very inviting, like it was somebody's home. I went back 2 days later and felt like there was a presence there. As I was coming down the side of the hill into the ravine, I came into a clearing. The weeds around me were about halfway up my leg, just below my knees. I started to walk off the trail into an open area and got about 10 feet from the trail when I heard the most blood-curdling scream I have ever heard in my life. It was a mixture of a high-pitched scream like a woman screaming down to a guttural growling all at the same time. It was very loud. I mean, it was so loud that I felt like I had to cover my ears. I was terrified, and I stopped dead in my tracks. Then I had a thought come into my head almost like ESP, and it told me to leave. I turned around, walking up that ravine, looking over my shoulder, and I never saw what made the noise, but I knew in my heart that it was a Sasquatch. I have never been back there, nor will I ever go back there again. You know, that's one of those encounters where you don't see it, but you hear it, obviously. But the ESP, the feeling that you have, you know, that's telling you to leave, that's interesting to me. And I get that a lot. Matter of fact, we've got some other stories coming up tonight with that element in it. And so thanks, Michael, for sending that. That was really good. The next encounter was sent to me by Jonathan. He writes, I'm 22 years old and I live in the tiny town of Nama, Michigan. Jonathan, I hope I pronounced the name of your town right. It's a pretty quiet town and not much goes on here. The family farm where I live is pretty far back in the woods, about an hour from the nearest town. It was right about mid-July, and my brother had come to town with my 3-year-old nephew to help out with some tree clearing. After a few hours of work, we stopped for a break. My nephew asked if we could go see the cows. My brother gave me the okay to take him to the low pasture that was about a 10-minute ride by four-wheeler. As we came down the trail, I had a feeling something wasn't right, and I heard the cows acting up. When we rounded the last bend, we saw the herd huddled up towards the field corner. I grabbed my binoculars and started scanning. My nephew grabbed my arm and squeezed it tightly before stammering out in absolute fear, "Monster!" I lowered my binoculars quickly and looked to my left where I saw a large ape-like creature running on two legs towards the herd. He had to stand about 12 feet at least, and he was built like a linebacker on steroids. I watched in horror as he leapt at the herd, easily jumping over a cow, reaching in the huddle of cattle and grabbing a calf and chucking it with ease over its shoulder. It then shoved its way out of the herd, and about 3 more creatures of the same type but smaller rushed the calf and grabbed it and then took off for the woods. I unholstered the .357 I usually kept and tried to get a shot off at them. The creatures that grabbed the calf dropped it and kept running. I remember the angry look on the larger one's face as he looked at me. Before he reached the tree line, he tried to grab the calf again but wound up yanking its leg clean off. Whoa. My nephew was crying and gripping me as tight as he could. We then turned around and raced back to the house where I dropped him off and got my brother and my dad. I didn't know how to tell them what really happened, so I just said a bear had done it because who would believe what had actually happened? And my nephew to this day will not go to the pasture with me. Jonathan, that's scary, man. I don't blame your nephew for not wanting to go back down there, and I'm wondering why you want to go back down there. But that really is a good story, and that it creates a real image of these things. The image of these things out in a field is almost as spooky to me as if there's one 10 feet away from you in the woods. I don't know. Seeing these huge creatures move across these fields is spooky. It's like that story in one of my previous videos where Patricia, in the moonlight, sees those 4 huge creatures walking out in the cornfield several hundred yards away in the moonlight. That's just creepy. Anyway, thanks, Jonathan. I appreciate it. Good story. This next story, this 4th story, is really cool. It's sent by Kenny. He writes, I really enjoy your channel and did not realize how many people have had encounters. That is why I wish to share my story with you. My story is a little unusual. I grew up in the backwoods of East Texas. I used to spend a lot of days in the woods or fishing on my pond. I like tracking game on my land, and I got really good at it. I got to know all the animals in my area and was very comfortable in the woods. Around the age of 13, I decided to build a shelter in the middle of my woods. The shelter was up for about 2 months when I started noticing that things would be moved and something was sleeping there. I just figured it was a deer because there's a lot of deer in the area. The size of the bedding area in the shelter made me think that 3 or 4 were sleeping there. Several months later, I went to check my fence line because we had had a calf come up missing. There was a creek that ran through the west side of the property, so I started there. I found a print in the mud. It was just a partial print, but it was bigger than mine, and I was a big 13-year-old. I found several branches broken off at about 6.5 to 7.5 foot tall. As I was trying to be quiet and following this trail, I noticed the normal, cheerful woods were quiet. I tracked it for what seemed like hours. Then the trail became erratic, like the thing got startled and started going in circles. After a few minutes, I picked up some signs on the directions that it went. It was almost a straight line back where I started tracking it. That is when I realized that it was now tracking me. I still have not been that scared in all of my life. I was used to being the one stalking the animals, not the one being stalked. I heard noises behind me. I didn't see anything, but then a large rock flew through the air about 8 feet to my left, and it shattered a small tree. I ran back to the house as fast as I could, grabbing my shotgun and hiding in the corner of my bedroom. It took me several weeks to build up the courage to go back into the woods, but when I did, my shotgun went with me. When I finally went back to my shelter, I was scared again, because the rock that was thrown at me was sitting at one end of the shelter, surrounded by a bunch of little rocks. That's when I decided to refuse to be scared. I started leaving treats at the shelter and simple toys. I figured I would eventually lure it out, and then I could finish this and I could have my woods back. It did not work because I guess it knew I was there and it would wait for me to leave. The treats would always be gone, but sometimes the toys would still be there for a while, but you could tell that they had been moved. Eventually, I just learned to live with it. It never became hostile to me again. I guess we came to an understanding. From then on, I always felt like I was being watched by something, but I never saw it. That went on for a couple of years. I stuck to my side of the woods, and it stuck to its side, just sharing the shelter. I was about 17 doing my homework under my favorite tree, and I could still feel it was watching me. I was not paying attention to time. Then I heard a loud bang against a tree, and that's when I noticed that it was getting dark. I started to head home, and I was getting close to the edge of the woods when I noticed something running in front of me, and I could hear things behind me. I caught a glimpse of what it was. It was a pack of coyotes. I counted 5, but there could have been more. So I backed up to the biggest tree I could find and pulled my Bowie knife out and my pocket knife, and I got ready to fight. I heard a loud grunt and what sounded like a Mack truck coming through the woods. The coyote stopped advancing on me. Then this thing let out a howl. That howl shook up the coyotes and they took off running. As for me, I just walked out of the woods, knowing if this thing wanted to hurt me, it could have at any time. I would take naps sometimes out there. I felt safe. I eventually left for trade school, and when I graduated and came home, I went looking for my friend in the woods, but found nothing. You could tell from the shelter it was destroyed from weather and no sign of it. I did not know what this thing was until much later when I started hearing about Bigfoot. From what I know now, it sounds like it was a juvenile Bigfoot that I encountered at first, and then he or she grew to an adult just like me. I also never heard or saw signs of others. I never saw it, although I wish I could have. I did find out that it did not like anyone else in the woods. One of the boys in my school was poaching with his older brother on my land and was chased off by something he said that scared him. The boy would not tell me what happened. He just told me that the woods scared the crap out of him. So the Bigfoot was running poachers off your land, Kenny. Thanks, Kenny, for sending that in. Wow, you grew up with a Bigfoot in your woods. And I know you wish you could have seen it. That would have been a great memory. And obviously that thing wasn't out to hurt you. Like you said, if it ever wanted to hurt you, it could have got you anytime. All right, I appreciate it. Okay, I hope y'all enjoyed those stories. That's going to do it for me tonight. My voice is getting a little weak. I've been singing. I was singing on the way home to the radio. Ruined my voice. I can't do that anymore. But anyway, thank you for watching. Thank you for all the comments. You guys are the nicest people in the world. And 99% of the comments are always so encouraging. And I really appreciate it, and I love you for it. And we will see you guys on the next video. Thank you.
Being a real bad boy. I've got a ton of gravel in my shoes, world on my shoulder, heart full of blues. I'm in the dirt, down in the dirt. Yeah.